The last time I looked, it was topping at 7-2, nothing. The Yankees are losing. So, can everyone please stand? Since we're streaming this, we're going to be saluting the American flag. Can everyone please stand? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Our second meeting of the 2019-2020 school year. We have exciting speakers tonight. We have Senator Mr. Phil Boyle with us, and he's going to talk about Albany. I guess we're all happy to hear about Albany. But before we do the introductions, we're going to go around the room and introduce ourselves. So let's start at the end.
Good evening, Kyle Valentine, Assistant Principal at Tecumseh Elementary School.
Steve Rutherford, Principal, Sequoia High School. Hi, Vinny Iorio, Assistant Principal, Sequoia High School.
Jim Beck, President of B's Bargaining Unit, so we represent teachers, parents, see you on lobby all the time, and also special ed teacher over at Sequoia High School.
Hi, my name is Ksenia Piano. I'm an English Science first year student here at UTC.
Hi, my name is Joseph Baez. I'm a graduate from the Piano Science program here at UTC.
It's Marina. I'm a science teacher at UTC.
Wonderful.
I'm a student at Sequoia High School.
Special educator at Sequoia High School.
Joshua Benitez. I'm an Adelphi senior BSW student interning at BAC Alternative High School.
Great.
And during the day I work for Suffolk County Housing Department in the Emergency Needs Unit.
Wonderful.
Hi, I'm Eileen Mann. I am the Administrative Coordinator for PAP and SAS.
Yeah, go ahead. You're
Susan Linden for BOCES Board of Ed.
Billy Shang, BOCES Board of Ed.
okay.
Patrick Fife, I'm an attorney with Toomey Latham, and I'm the president of the Bohemian Civic Association, which is the Connect High School.
Kathy Maui. I'm from the Treatment Center. I'm the superintendent.
Stephen Gessner, BOCES Board.
My name is Molly. I'm a teaching assistant at West Hampton Beach Learning Center.
Chantal Church, visit teacher at Brown.
Sam Garvis, I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Finance at South Country School District, and will be coming in as the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources at Eastern South BOCES.
Okay. Great.
Leanne Arnold, Director of Career Technical and Adult Education.
Tracy Gady. I work in our Regional Information Center. Attorneys for Suffolk BOCES.
Good line staff, nominations, Suffolk BOCES Board.
Okay.
Sorry.
You can introduce yourself.
Introduce yourself too.
I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Terry Lark. I'm actually principal of Barrington Better Elementary School in North Falmouth, but my son attends Eastern Suffolk BOCES.
Oh, nice. Welcome. Did we miss
Kathy Romano, Eastern Suffolk BOCES trustee, hot water getter.
Okay. And
I'm Julie Lutz, Chief Operating Officer.
I'm Bill Miller, Vice President of the Board and Chairperson of the Legislative Committee. And I would like to welcome everyone. We need an acceptance of the meeting minutes of September 12th, so if you could browse that and we can put a motion on the floor. We need a second. All in favor? Aye. Motion carries. Dr. Lutz.
So I am so excited to have Senator Boyle here. One of the things that BOCES does for the superintendents in Suffolk County is we run collegial circles or induction programs for them, and one of the topics is how superintendents can learn to get along or to interact with elected officials. And Senator Boyle graciously comes in and has that conversation with folks because this committee understands, especially if you've been coming, but education is a political endeavor, right? And you need to understand the politics of education, you need to understand the politics of Albany, and you need to understand how to effectively advocate for what you need. And the senator just does a phenomenal job, I think, of just really openly and honestly talking about that from, the political side of the fence. But the last time he came in, he actually had a very engaging, we had a very engaging conversation about how politics in Albany are different than politics in Albany used to be. So let me just tell you a little bit about the senator. He's been involved in Albany politics for quite a while. He has served in the New York State Senate since 2012. Prior to his tenure in the Senate, he served for 16 years in the New York State Assembly. He was the administrative assistant or chief of staff to former Congressman Rick Blasio and legislative director to the late Congressman Frank Horton. He's a graduate of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with a degree in political science, holds a law degree from Albany Law School, and a master's degree in public administration from the University at Albany. Early in his legal career, Phil served as an assistant town attorney with the town of Islip and was a founding partner in the law firm of Steinberg and Boyle. He currently serves as counsel at the law firm of Egan and Golden. Currently serving his fourth term in the Senate, Senator Boyle serves as the ranking minority member of the Committee on Environmental Conservation, the ranking minority member of the Senate Committee on Corporations, Authorities, and Commissions, and also serves as a member of the Codes, Commerce, Economic Development, and Small Business, Domestic Animal Welfare, Housing, Construction, and Community Development, and the Judiciary Committees. Senator Boyle and his wife Victoria reside in Bayshore with their dog, Livy. What kind of dog is Livy?
She's a toy fox terrier.
Oh, okay. Anyways, we welcome you to this committee and interested to hear your reflections on Albany.
Thanks, Julia, and I appreciate very much the opportunity to be here. I prefer to answer questions, so I'll just talk for a little bit, and then any questions you have about politics, or government, I'd be happy to answer. And first of all, thank you for what you do every day. Educating our youth is the most important thing that we handle in our state, and you do it on the front lines every single day. We can pass all the laws in the world in Albany, but it doesn't make a difference without your day-to-day commitment and dedication to your professions and your students. As Julie mentioned, my background, before I was elected to the state legislature many years ago, I served in Washington as a congressional staff person for 5 years. And now I've been in Albany this is my 25th year. It will be starting in January. And I never thought between law school, grad school, and the legislature, this is going to be my 30th winter in Albany, New York. I never thought that was going to happen. But the good news I'd like to start out by saying is that it's not as bad as you think and hear about in politics, generally speaking. Certainly in Albany. I know you watch TV, CNN, Fox News, and everyone's screaming at each other. Republicans hate Democrats, Democrats hate Republicans, and everyone hates Trump, or whatever the case may be. It's not that bad. It really is not. We deal with each other as legislators, and I've been doing it many, many years, as human beings, as people, and we have, the example I always use is in the state Senate, we have the legislative body, the chamber, and then right off the chamber we have the Senator's Lounge, right? There's some food there, and every single day we're in session, we're all sitting in the lounge at some point in time, eating bad food, and talking about our families, our communities, the Mets versus the Yankees, everything, just normal conversation. We're not screaming at each other. We don't dislike each other. We get on the floor, we're going to debate issues. You're a liberal, I'm a conservative, I'm personally a moderate, so I'm in the middle. But there's no personal animosity, or very little, very, very, very little personal animosity between legislators. So we know what we're trying to do for the best for New York State. We may disagree on how to get there, and we'll have a healthy debate on the floor of the Senate, but we don't dislike each other. And I look at it from the perspective, you think about AOC. Everyone hears about AOC in Washington, right? Well, in Albany, we have probably 6 or 7 people that make AOC looks like Ronald Reagan. Very, very liberal individuals, Democratic Socialists, far left, And I don't think they're bad people. We have a philosophical difference on how to approach government and society, but they're not bad people. And so we have healthy and nice conversations and debates on the floor. I see in the notes here that Assemblyman Smith had spoken at a previous meeting, and just to reiterate, what the big differences that you need to think about in state government anyway. Now, you deal with politics in your schools and BOCES every single day, whether it's with parents, whether it's other administrators, whether it's teachers. That's politics, right? And we do politics just on a governmental level. Who has leverage over you or the issue that you're trying to promote? Who is supporting a policy that you like? Who's opposing a policy you want to support? We do it on a legislative level, shall we say. So the big difference that's occurred in Albany over the last year or two is the change in the state Senate. Now, when I talk about Republicans and Democrats, again, I'm a Republican. When I say Democrats, this is just factual. I'm not saying one's bad, one's good, whatever the case may be. So the state's governor, obviously Andrew Cuomo, is a Democrat from New York City, right? The state assembly, where I served for 16 years, completely controlled by Democrats from New York City, okay? There are 150 New York State Assembly people, and I believe 108 of them are Democrats out of 150. And the vast majority of them are from New York City, okay? Perhaps a more liberal philosophy for the vast majority of those individuals, right? The state Senate where I serve has been controlled by the Republicans for 48 of the last 50 years. That's a lot of time, right? Even when they were redrawing all the lines and shifting all policy, big Republican years, Democratic years, the Republicans always maintained control of the New York State Senate. And that was very much, when you say Republicans, you think of New York State. You got three different areas, right? You got Long Island, New York City, and upstate New York. Long Island was traditionally always Republican. New York City, obviously very Democrat, and upstate Republican. Rural, more agricultural, right? New York is becoming more blue, and even in areas like Long Island. You look at the politics of Long Island. When I was younger, you would never have a Democratic county executive on Long Island in Suffolk or Nassau County. Now you have both Nassau and Suffolk County have Democratic county executives and county legislatures, at least in Suffolk County. So these are things that would have never happened in a million years. As the state becomes more blue, the philosophy and politics of ideology, should I say, of Albany is also becoming more to the left. So, P.S. last year, 2018 is what they call midterm election, right? President Trump is elected in 2016. A lot of New Yorkers are not happy with his presidency, shall we say, and come out in force in a blue wave. I would call it a blue tsunami in 2018, and the Democrats, for basically the first time in 50 years, take over the majority of the state Senate. And I'm not talking about little numbers, okay? So before the last election in 2018, the Republicans controlled the state Senate. It was close, 32 Republicans to 31 Democrats. Very close, right? After that election, there are now 40 Democrats and 23 Republicans. Huge disparity, right? And the large percentage of that Democratic majority are further to the left ideologically. Importantly now, what you saw is that with some moderates, how we say moderate Democrats, lost in primaries. And I'm just laying the field here. So the people that won are maybe further to the left. What you're seeing now already happening, the election's not till next year, is that moderate Democrats in both the Senate and the Assembly are fearing for their political lives. They do not want to lose to the next AOC, the young AOC type, from running against them from the left. So even longtime moderate Democrats, who I've known for 20 years, suddenly are moving to positions they would have never in a million years taken, a year and a half ago, before AOC got elected. They don't want to lose next year. And so the philosophy of Albany is moving not just for those, say, younger Democratic Socialists, shall we say, but even the old-timers are moving to the left to protect themselves from political fallout next year. What does that mean? It means that for our educational system here on Long Island, it could be problematic. There's New York City-centric or focused in Albany in terms of legislation. We see things that we would have never in a million years seen. For example, rent control. Okay, that's always the big thing in Albany. Rent control, you've always had in New York City, rent control. There's a board that says how much landlords can charge for their rent, or the increase that landlords could charge each year for their rent. 1%, maybe 1.5%. obviously the costs of that are more than that, or costs of being a landlord are more than 1% increase a year. So what happened this past year, rent control statewide, as long as it's voted in by a local municipality. So there could be a governing board to say how much landlords can increase their rent, even on Long Island and upstate New York. This is just a general philosophical difference that we normally would not have here on Long Island, but as a result of legislative challenges and bills that were passed in Albany, it's completely different now. Again, getting back to education, where does the money go? When the Republicans all controlled the state Senate, there are 9 state senators from Long Island. It used to be all of us were Republican. They called the Long Island 9. It was a kind of a power base there, you know. Now there are three of us who are Republicans and 6 Democrats. They're with the majority, which is very good, provided that we make sure that we get proper resources and things coming back to Long Island, and everything not going into New York City. I would argue that they've done a decent job, not as good as we did, shall we say. This is being recorded. I don't want you to use it. No, okay, very good. So and what's going to happen next year is another question. So the legislative agenda that they had earlier this year, 2018, was very far left, as I said. What happened, or 2019, what happens in 2020 before the election, how far left, shall we say, does New York State go in the state government as these individuals run for re-election? I don't know. You know, it could be anything. One of the things they're talking about is certainly legalizing marijuana. I think that's first on the agenda. Legalizing prostitution. I think it's going to happen. I never thought I'd say that about New York State, but I think that a lot of the members from New York City are going to legalize prostitution. The prosecutors, needless to say, are freaking out about that prospect, but that could well happen. Single-payer health care could be on the agenda, basically a government-run health care system in New York State. All things that would traditionally would have never happened are suddenly either passing, being discussed, possibly could pass. We'll see what happens in between now and next November. But it is going to be an interesting ride, and we'll see how much of a pushback there's going to be. A lot of the politics of the next year, obviously, are going to be on the national level. Everyone's focusing on Trump and who's going to be the Democratic nominee, and that is going to have a lot to say what happens on the state level, on the local level. How mad are the Republicans? How mad are the Democrats to come out to vote, the voter turnout and stuff like that? But all of this stuff has an effect on your schools, the BOCES system, and how it's going to play out in Albany beyond, anything that we could say. I can come out and say, I support this educational initiative, I support that educational initiative. It's not going to make a difference if people come out, vote next year, say they hate Trump and they're going to vote for whomever. I mean, I always, for the old timers in the room, I think of Watergate. When Richard Nixon was very unpopular and was going to get impeached, and the next election, it was obviously a Democratic tidal wave. Republican Nixon was in trouble. There were agricultural commissioners in Texas who had never been to Washington who lost their election because everyone hated Richard Nixon. And I think next year we're going to see who the Democratic nominee is against Trump. Could be a Democratic socialist, someone far left, and it could be a Republican backlash. I don't know. That's going to be beyond our control, but it's going to have an effect, so we need to pay attention to what's going on. And with that, I'll stop, and I'll be happy to answer any questions about issues you're interested in.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So there were a lot of newly elected state senators.
Yep.
So as you all know, election happens in November. They take office in January and jump right into the need to kind of build a budget or review a budget,
right,
or support or not the governor's proposed budget.
Mm-hmm.
So how difficult of a process is that for newly elected individuals?
That's a great question, and it is very difficult to learn the process so quickly. When you're elected, when you take office, your first day is January 4th, and you're voting on the state budget, a $175 billion document, less than 3 months later. So one of the things that we need to remember, is in New York State, of all the 50 states, our governor has the most power when it comes to budgetary matters. I mean, most states are like, they make it, the legislature has power, the governor has power. In New York, it's like this. The governor's up here, the legislature's down here. The reason being, our state constitution, which I think we should change, however, says that the governor proposes his budget, or her budget, in January, beginning of January, right? Say, okay, I want to spend $170 billion, say, on our programs. So the state legislature says, wait a minute, well, we like that. We like that program, that program, that program. We don't like this. We want to cut this. We want to cut that. The way, and that sounds like negotiation. That's a standard thing in most states. Here in New York State, the governor can say, nope. If you don't pass this budget by April 1st, I'm going to put everything I want in the budget on April 2nd. That's the way it is. It's my budget. Take it or leave it. It's my way or the highway, which is completely unfair. So the state legislators are at a disadvantage to say, well, we really don't like that. He'll say tough. And especially this governor. Cuomo is like, it's all him. So the legislature can say, well, we want to add this or take away that. Cuomo will once in a while agree with it. But you got a gun to your head when you say that if you don't agree to what the governor wants, he's going to do everything he wants. And that plays a lot into the education funding. How much is the original budget proposal? What's going to be in there in terms of funding formulas? Is it going to be foundation aid? Is it going to be, and the next big thing coming down the pike in education? And what is the governor going to do about it? And what's our response? We can say, hey, governor, wouldn't this be a great idea to do it this way instead of the way you suggested? Sometimes he'll listen, rarely he'll listen, but we have very little say after the fact if we don't want it to be a complete one-person show. Yeah.
So, Phil, would you talk about how some of the policy pieces are tucked into the budget?
Yeah.
And how that affects the process?
Yeah. That's a great question, Kathy. And that's another thing that we have in New York State that a lot of other states don't have. The governor puts in policies and agendas having nothing to do with the budget. You would think the budget, something as big as $175 billion, would just be how much are we going to pay for fund this program, how much are we going to pay for this fund program, but not. It's he's going to have abortion language in there. He's going to have nothing to do with the budget, other things, policy agendas, because according to the New York State Constitution, the one thing we have to do all year, if we pass no other bills, is pass the New York State budget by April 1st. That's the one bill we have to pass. And that's why the governor is going to say, everything I want, all my policy programs, I'm going to put it in there. And again, we get back to what I was talking about earlier. If we don't vote yes and don't pass it, he can automatically do it the next day himself or herself. And that's where we get a whole plethora of things. And we have big debates, about policy things that had nothing to do with the budget. A perfect example is going on right now, okay? One of the things that we had in this most recent budget was we created a commission on public campaign financing. However you feel about public taxpayer funding of campaigns, pro or con, you would probably say, well, that shouldn't be in the budget. That's a pretty big thing. We should talk about that separately. And another thing, which is huge, and it hasn't got much press, but remember this phrase, fusion politics. Because I can tell you that every single senator and assembly person is thinking about this nonstop for the next 2 months. What it is when you go into the election booth, you say, okay, here's Senator Smith, right? He's a Republican, but he's also endorsed by the Conservative Party, the Independence Party, and Libertarian Party. So you walk in and you're going to see one person's name on 3 or 4 different lines. Democrats are typically cross-endorsed by the Working Families Party. So there's a proposal that was in the state budget, the governor insisted on putting it in there, to ban that. So we could only run with our name on one line. Big difference, and from a political perspective, I think it probably hurts the Republicans more than the Democrats, but it could go either way. There are some very powerful minor parties, or third parties they call them, Working Families Party, the Conservative Party, that could change the entire political dynamic. So our state budget, again, having nothing to do with the state budget, created a commission to look at this fusion politics. They're meeting right now in different parts of the states. They're going to meet here on October 22nd to have a hearing, and then they're going to decide what to do about public financing campaign. Again, if we're going to get taxpayer, like the program they have in New York City and some other places, if I raise $10, then I get six times that amount from the government for, to pay for my campaign. They're going to do that on a statewide basis. So we'd be doing that for every candidate in New York State. But part of that, again, more importantly for most politicians, is the fusion aspect, is fusion politics. And so they're going to come out with their report, this commission will come out with their report by December 1st, and then we have 20 days to go back to Albany if we want to change it or do away with their proposal and do our own bill or whatever. But this is a typical example of something that was put into the state budget, having nothing to do with funding a program to help individuals, but policy that all of us are greatly concerned about, that was snuck in there at the 11th, literally the 11th hour. Yeah.
Bill, I want to thank you for the money you gave us in aid the last time around, but it's always bothered me that the person's zip code determines the degree of what their education is.
Yeah.
If you look, you can be sitting in one district where the graduation rate is in the high 90s, and you can be in a neighboring district where it's in the 20s or thereabouts.
Absolutely.
How do you fix it?
That's an excellent question too. I mean, I represent the 4th Senate District. It basically goes from Bayport to Lindenhurst. I represent West Islip, East Islip. I represent Wyandan School District and Brentwood School District and part of Central Islip School District. Huge difference in the graduation rates and the resources available. I mean, I think we have to look at the formulas and how right now they're rather unfair, and give more resources to those communities that may need more resources. The problem is when you start playing with those formulas, New York City is going to win. And somebody loses. There's always winners and losers, and that's going to be the case. And that gets back to my earlier point about the senators from Long Island. Again, nine of the senators, 6 Democrats who were in the majority, they make up the majority, and 3 Republicans who were in the minority. We used to have the power, now we don't have the power. But the Senate Democrats need to say, if we're going to change the formula for Long Island has to make sure that we are taken care of and we're protected for all of our school districts. Because a lot of my colleagues in Albany think that you live in Long Island, you're a multimillionaire automatically. You got polo horses, and I say there's a couple people down here, but not the average person. And it's a daily struggle to educate them about the fact that we have poor communities, middle-class communities, and a couple rich communities.
Is there any thought to rewriting the aid formula and the way it is? And if so, do you know what they're trying to do?
I don't know, and that gets to the point of what the governor's going to propose. I've been hearing rumors about that he may try and change the foundation aid formula, or overall, come up with a new formula for funding our educational programs and system. But we'll see. We'll know soon enough. It'll be by December.
Because we at the island are having concerns about that, because if you change the way we get our money, it's a big.
No question. No question. Yes.
Senator Boyle, right now in reading the papers, Governor Cuomo is looking to withhold back Medicare payments to the hospitals.
Yeah.
Back in the 1990s, his father withheld state aid to the school districts, where we started in January in no state aid. Do you feel that could happen again?
I think he's going to focus on the health now. I don't see him going with the education. It depends on how big of a hole we're going to have. I think we have last I heard it was like a little over $3 billion, which is a huge amount of money, but relatively speaking, I've been up there when we had a $12 billion budget deficit going in. We were able to make some modifications and stuff like that. So $3 billion deficit is doable, and I do not think he has to go to the schools, but we'll keep our fingers crossed.
Right. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Does the success rate of the program determine if they get the funding that they need to keep the program going, like a place like this?
Yeah.
Does that matter, or is it all ego at the top?
Well, it should be merit-based. There's no question about it. It should be based on merit and the achievements of a program and a system, like BOCES. It is politics to a certain extent too. I mean, again, when you're in charge, you're suddenly like, oh boy, I'm going to get it from my area, even if that program on Long Island or Suffolk County is doing really well. I think we need some more back in my way. But I think that we should be okay for the short-term future anyway. Yeah.
Another question. You made mention of prostitution legalizing and also marijuana. Now we have vaping now.
Yeah.
That's a new danger to the youth of New York.
I think the governor, you may have heard, so when the problems with vaping started to become in the press a couple of months ago, the governor had an executive order to ban flavored e-cigarettes in New York State. It was just overturned in a court. At least it was put on hold, I should say. It wasn't overturned. I think what we need to do is go back to Albany tomorrow and have a special session to look at that, that issue, serious health concerns for our youth particularly. I think we will be dealing with it, but I don't foresee us going back before our new session in January to deal with it. And it's tragic to think there might be some kids that got sick or even worse between now and then, but they don't like to call us back to Albany very frequently.
Is big tobacco behind that, or they're not getting a piece?
I have not heard from them. I think they are getting a piece, but they don't have a big lobbying effort because they know it looks bad for them, right. And of course, but mind you, I'm hearing from a lot of smokers they say, hey, I couldn't get off cigarettes for 30 years, and now I have an e-cigarette, and yeah, I mean, so it's
now on the patch to get off everything.
Yeah, and so I mean, we'll see. I think there's going to be more information coming out. Hopefully, not too bad, but they might find another way of what the reason is that's causing it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
So one of the questions or proposals, is anyone propose that the funding that comes in from that be tied to treatment intervention, and that would maybe use some funds, and good use of funds, since the OASIS budget has not gone up in 25 years.
The funds from where?
From the Office of Comprehensive
Yeah.
Services in New York State.
Mm-hmm.
Has not changed in almost
Right.
25, 30 years. The funding that's going to come in, if he does plan to legalize this, at least the money
Yeah.
can be put to
Right.
prevention targets.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it should. One of the things that I was perhaps, you're only known for a few things when you're in the legislature. You spend the majority of the time on a few issues. The big one with me was opioid and heroin. When I was first elected to the Senate, I was made chairperson of this committee. I went around New York State, held 18 hearings, literally from Brentwood to Buffalo, about the opioid crisis. We were the first ones to really bring it to the attention of the general public. And so I am completely opposed to legalizing marijuana. I supported medical marijuana, but I don't think we should legalize it for that very reason. We have increased funding for opioid and heroin programs. We need to go further. They need to be bed. They need to be treatment on demand, really. We're not there yet. I do not see them using those funds for those programs. I just think that there's too many other programs, again, from New York City that we want to fund this, we want to fund that. I mean, you think about like a Mayor de Blasio. He has a program for just about everything. Most of them don't work, in my opinion. But he's spending a tremendous amount of money, and they will ask for these funds to be brought into New York City for different programs, and maybe a little bit may go to heroin and opioid treatment. But
just to keep on that same vein,
yeah.
a bigger drug that's a bigger problem than has been is alcohol.
Yeah.
And so when they use the argument for alcohol legalization, that's the number one killer of teenagers.
Right.
And if we look at the effect and the fallout of
Yeah.
that,
Mm-hmm.
we are still having difficulties with the prevention for alcohol. So
Right.
if we're going to put the funding and we're going to target it,
Mm-hmm.
it should at least be put into the areas where, we're going to see the effect.
Right. No question. Yeah, and we were making headway with the heroin and opioids, but now we have other chemicals like fentanyl, carfentanil. The stronger, there's always a different chemical system they put together, and that's really been the problem. That's why the death rate on overdoses have gone down, but not a lot, because of the changes in the chemistry.
Do they realize?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Do they realize though that it takes more than one time through a program to get clean?
Mm.
Do they frown on that? Oh, this guy went through 3 times, it still didn't work.
No,
It takes a long time. So
yeah, and I don't think that's the case. I think most people realize. I mean, the average is like 5. I mean, it's not going to happen the first time. But the biggest change when I was the chairperson of the committee, the difference we made was we changed the insurance system. When I was first elected and made chairman, the average stay for insurance coverage of an opioid or heroin treatment was 4 days. We changed it to a national model that made it up to 28 days, And it's interesting the way that this is the way politics works. So I grew up in East Islip. I graduated in 1979. A kid was a year behind me named Sean Doolin. He grew up, we were friends in law school. He grew up to be the lobbyist for Blue Cross Blue Shield insurance, right? And so we got there. When I became chairman, I said, how can we fix this? And he said, let's talk about changing the formula to get a month coverage instead of 4 days coverage. So it was just two kids from East Islip who played soccer together that making a big difference in this. It's interesting. Personal connections is a lot. Yeah. Do you have a question?
So you brought up earlier about the change of the political structure,
Yes.
especially with the new age politicians,
Yep.
especially because of youth coming in more specifically. So my question to you would be, based on a state and a federal level, do you see the concept of a moderate Democrat or a moderate Republican becoming basically an ineffective leader because of how turbulent it actually is within the confines of how we view politics as a public and also as politicians?
That's an excellent question. Do the moderates go away? I mean, that's the question. Are we going to only have two extremes? And I think for a lot of people, they want that to happen. I mean, I know the media wants it to happen because they write exciting stories about the radicals on both sides. But I think there will always be a significant number in the middle. And I think that's true of the voters as well as the elected officials. Because, as I say, I'm a moderate Republican, and I think, to give you some idea, so last year when I ran for re-election, typically when I run in the gubernatorial election, not the presidential election, when the governor runs, 2018 and then 2022, my office, I have the best staff in the world. It's not because of me, it's because of my staff. Win by pretty significant margins. I usually win like 68% of the vote those years, right? Last year I won with 52% of the vote. Barely squeaked by against someone who wasn't really well known and didn't have a lot of money, because of the schism in this area. But I do think that the voters are going to start saying, look, we can't have crazies on either side. It can't be far left or far right. For example, you look at, right, a lot of people feel Trump are out here, Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders is out here, What about for the first time yesterday, Michael Bloomberg says, I may run again. He said he was going to get rid of it, but, I mean, Bloomberg's a moderate, you would say, right? I mean, on most issues. And so even he's saying, look, we can't continue this way, far left, far right. It has to be more in the middle. And I think the vast majority of Americans, because I've talked to Republicans, Democrats, communists, everyone, they say, I could live with Michael Bloomberg just to stop this craziness on both sides, So I think that in the long run, that's probably going to be the case.
So then on top of that, too, just thinking about the modern political structure, typically we always see the same congressmen, same senators consistently elected. And many people attribute that to the idea that policy is consistently gridlocked. So do you believe that it's possibly a good thing based off of the concept of stability, having these people still elected, or do you think that it actually contributes to the modern gridlock that we're facing?
Well, I think it depends on the policies, really. I mean, if you had, say you snap your finger and AOC is the new Speaker of the House, right? And Elizabeth Warren is the president, and, somebody else is the Senate Majority Leader. It would be a very different America, you'd say, in terms of what legislation is passed. And the same as the far right-wing people who are elected to those positions. I think the vast majority of Americans are not that way. They don't want to see that. One thing I don't see, and they talk about this in New York State government all the time. They say, the New Yorkers like Democratic governors and Republican controllers. I'm like, who knows who? Anybody know? Some people in this room know who the New York State controllers or what party belongs to. Most people don't. So they just vote who they like, maybe the party, and more people are voting by their party. I grant you that, But if they hear someone is too extreme on either side, they're not going to vote for that person. Even if they don't vote for the other guy, they're not going to vote for a person they feel is too extreme for their political position. And one of the things we talked about, and Julie, I mentioned at the superintendent's meeting, was it's going to be more regional than political. That's what you're going to see. So you have the 6 Democrat state senators on Long Island with the 3 Republicans. There are a lot of issues that they're coming with us, voting with us to say, this is for Long Island. It's not Republican, Democrat, it's for Long Island. The same is true at upstate New York. You have mostly Republicans in upstate New York, some Democrats, but if I'm a Democratic Assembly person in upstate New York representing a rural county, is it to my benefit to vote with a New York City person, against the interests of my upstate communities? No, because you won't be there after the next election. And so those people, if they do decide, I'm philosophically a democratic socialist, for example. I'm going to vote this way. If they're up for re-election, they're going to have a hard time.
Can you explain socialist to the our students?
Yeah, I think I can. All right. It really
Capitalist and socialist.
Well, it's a philosophy of what the role of government is. You know, does government help you as an individual by getting out of the way and letting private enterprise solve a lot of the issues, or are they going to provide programs that help? Most people, I think, feel that there's a balance. You know, you hear some socialist countries, Venezuela, some other ones that are not having a good time because usually government-run programs are inefficient, and some other countries are the other extreme with almost no social programs to help their individuals. So it really is the role of government. Socialism has a much greater source of government influence and control as opposed to capitalism or free market system.
Socialism is more of a risk factor.
Yeah. I mean, you
According to Bill.
Well,
According to Bill.
And I don't think a socialism is a bad word. I just don't disagree with the philosophy. But I mean, look at Greece, right? Greece had this huge economic crisis a few years back, right? And then they're reading, like, 40% of the people who live in Greece work for the government. And it's like, how does that work? I mean, how could you be possibly paying that many people on a government salary? Because obviously you have to raise the taxes to, to pay for all these salaries. And when you don't have enough tax money coming in, that's when you get in a financial crisis. So I believe the role of government is important, but should be limited. Thank you. Yeah.
So Phil, I have two disparate questions. So let me ask the economic question first, because our students and maybe people who haven't been through the education budget process as often, when you start out and say, well, we have a $3 billion deficit in the state.
Yep.
And we're going to go into our budget season and we're going to have to lay out money. Everybody knows that their local school district can't have a deficit. So
right.
How does the state have a deficit? Can you explain sort of how that functions first as you go into the budget?
Right.
And then how the budget uses that as its political tool?
Sure, yeah. So according to our New York State Constitution, we have to have a balanced budget, okay? Whatever the amount of money we take in taxes and revenues and whatever else has to be exactly what we spend in the upcoming year. Now, a lot of it is guesswork, right? Because there's financial analysts in the budget office, the budget department saying, okay, we think we're going to get this much tax revenue from beer, in New York State. This is what it's going to be. And then suddenly people stop drinking as much beer as they did. Maybe the World Series only went 4 games instead of 7 games or whatever, So they're not getting as much money in. And sometimes a couple of those factors weigh into the fact that you have a budget deficit. $3 billion is a lot of money. Sometimes it's a couple $100 million, which is a rounding error up there. Sometimes it's $3 billion. Sometimes it's $12 billion if we have an economic recession like we did a number of years ago. Now, obviously, it has to be balanced, the budget, so we need to start cutting to get down those $3 billion, and this needs to be done in the next few months. What programs are we going to cut? Everyone's saying, don't cut my program. This is vitally important. We can't cut this. Whatever. So the big areas for cuts are health and education. That's where the billions of dollars comes in. Medicaid alone in New York State as I said, it's about $175 billion budget in New York State. Medicaid is $25 billion of that. There's a lot of money. So even if you cut, okay, we're going to make it $24 billion instead of $25 billion, what programs are you going to cut to stop spending as much money to add up to that $3 billion? That takes place in the next few months as we go into the budget season. But the big argument is, again, what is cut? What programs?
Still, the census is something that we hear a lot of conversation about.
Yeah.
It's like, and that's what we get a lot of federal aid from to the state for IDEA and the rest of our programs.
Yep.
Also, there are 27 congressmen in New York. We're going to lose 2, is what they're predicting, because of the loss of population and the undercounting of our population.
Right.
Is the state doing anything to aid that? I mean, not aid the but aid the support of the census.
So every 10 years we do a census in this country, right? We try and count every American, every resident, and It's difficult. Obviously, you have a house on Smith Street, that's fine, but then you have homeless individuals, undocumented individuals that you can't find them. And so on a macro level, New York State is trying to find out how many people actually live here, so we get our fair share of federal funds. And then each community, each school district wants to know how many people live in their school district, okay? This is coming up, so it's going to happen. It starts in 2020, and the effects of it will be felt in 2021 or 2022, depending on how much money we have. We do have programs to try to enhance the number of people being counted, to make sure that those homeless individuals, some people may not documented, are counted. It has it makes a big difference in terms of not just federal aid, but also state aid and how we're going to distribute it from there. It's difficult, and when I read about New York City, when they have 60,000 approximately people living in shelters, and maybe 4,000 living on the streets, and trying to count all of those. We don't have those big numbers, obviously, but we have a lot of people similarly situated living on Long Island, residing that they will not be able to be counted. We're doing our part, but it's you're never going to get everyone, obviously. Yeah.
So it's a big factor as far as the money that we get from the federal government.
Yep.
And the representation that we have at Washington. So it's something that we should really be pushing on. I know the schools are doing it to an extent of what they can do.
Right.
There's privacy issues and whatnot.
Yeah.
The number that's less counted is 0 to 5.
Right. And that is, you're right, the federal representative is another example, right? So it goes, the number of Congress people you have is based on your population. When I started in government, we had 39 Congress people in New York State. Now we're down in the high 20s, 27. And it's going to go down, yeah. I mean, because everyone's going to California and Texas and Florida. So we're losing political clout. Florida's already surpassed us. There's going to be other states that may surpass us, and losing political power and revenue from Washington as a result of that. It's sad, and part of that is the cost of living and some other factors here, that people want to move south, shall we say. But we are trying to stem the tide to make New York State a better place to live and stay.
But again, the census, the most important thing is the children, of counting the children for the state aid.
Yeah, because we have to educate all the children.
That's right. And that's where we found into a little hole back in 2014 when we had the East End.
Yeah.
With the overflow. Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
And another aspect of the redistricting is of the census is the redistricting, right? So after they do the census, they count all the people living in the United States, and they change all the congressional lines. And they change, from New York State, they change all the Senate lines, like the lines I represent, and the Assembly lines. And it is, you've seen gerrymandering, you see the lines are all squiggly and stuff like that, craziness. That is going to play a big role on how many people we represent and what the lines look like, and changing the political dynamic of Albany for perhaps forever, because one of the things that happened before the census a few decades ago was the Democrats were in control of the state assembly, and they drew lines so the Democrats would never, again, I'm not saying Republican, good, bad, whatever, the Democrats drew the lines so the Democrats will basically always be in control of the state assembly. If that may well continue to be the case with the state Senate. So again, the Republicans controlled 48 of the last 50 years. If the Democrats control and draw the lines again in 2 years from now, it may be a Democratic state Senate forever. One of the things I find, I'm actually going to introduce legislation on this, is to make it done by computer. There's a professor out in the University of Michigan who has algorithms that can say, okay, we're going to take politics out of it. We're going to say what communities should be together, and he's got, do it fairly. Yeah, it happened in North Carolina. I got the idea. My stepson actually, ironically, works for the state Senate in North Carolina. And they brought a lawsuit, and so he's advocating to use this guy's lines. The court case said, use this professor's lines and do it by random. I think the professor came up with 1,000 different scenarios that was much more fair than the politics of it, the partisanship of it, and now they have to choose one of them. So it's going to be interesting. I'd like to do it in New York State. Just take the politics out of it. No Republican control, no Democratic control. Just do it by computer.
Good luck.
Yeah, right. I know. I don't think it's going to happen, but it's an idea. Yeah.
You mentioned before a single-payer system
Yes.
possibly in New York State. Would that mean the end of private health care in New York State?
Basically, it would be the government would be the arbiter of where the money comes from, and how it's expended to healthcare. I mean, I don't think it would come right out to be communism. It would be limited on how the funds are expended, and the government make all those decisions, or government entity, I should say.
Many
yeah,
unions,
yeah.
have negotiated
Yeah.
health care as a benefit.
Yep.
And that goes back, 50, 60, 70 years.
Yep.
So to just simply throw out private health care,
Mm-hmm.
something that's been long advocated and fought over,
Right.
strikes me as being incautious.
Oh, the unions are apoplectic if they're really ticked off about this idea. And I read a report yesterday that said that of those New Yorkers that have health care, now one of the way they say, it's going to be actually cheaper. My Democratic Socialist friends are saying it's going to be cheaper because you're not going to pay premiums for your insurance. You're going to, But the report just came out and said the taxes are going to go up so much, it's going to far outweigh the insurance premiums you're paying. 77% of the people who have insurance now will pay more because their taxes are going to go up. To give you some idea, as I said, the New York State budget is $170 billion. If we implemented this program, studies said our budget would increase by $158 billion, almost double the state budget to run this single-payer health care. Now, that being said, who's in charge of doing this? My friends on the New York City Democrats, Gustavo Rivera, a friend of mine, he's a Democratic Socialist from New York City. He is the chairperson of the Health Committee. And I love him, but to have him the voice of reason on this is scary. I mean, he's a chairperson of the committee, and he would say the same thing. He goes, "I shouldn't be the voice of reason. I'm a radical." Nice guy, but that's the philosophy. And they say, hey, I'm in power now. I'm going to do what I want to do. I was elected. My constituents. I said I'm going to run on single payer. I'm going to pass it, and there's going to be a big push to do it. So it's going to be a very interesting session come January. Buckle up. Yeah.
Well, I know that when we had the two branches with the two different parties in control, there already was a discrepancy going on between the dollar we were paying going up to Albany
Yeah.
and what came back to Long Island. How much has that shifted or changed now? Because that was a big concern.
It was, yeah, and we're getting less. Percentage-wise, New York City has more, no question about it. I mean, it wasn't a total, shift, but we got less than we had got when the Long Island crowd was in charge, shall we say? And that's going to be an issue in next year's election, I think. As we go into 2020. The Senate, the Assembly is going to say, we need to have a voice of Long Island. We need the majority in some way. We can't have one-party system, one-party rule in Albany or Washington. Whatever party. I don't think there should be Republicans in complete control of Washington. So,
Any other questions? Thank you, Senator.
well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
All right. So before we close, we would like to present the senator with a plaque. Also, our next meeting that we have upcoming is November 7th. We'll have one of our animal science teachers, Lisa Mangello, will talk about the National CTE Academic Conference. And also for what we were talking about, the census tonight, in January, we have President and CEO of Health and Welfare Council of Long Island, Rebecca Sannon. She'll be talking about the census.
If I could, when I talked about the things that you're known for, besides opioids, animal welfare legislation.
Right.
I have more bills for protecting animals than I do humans.
And also,
because I finally got up to Animal Advocacy Day last year.
Oh, actually.
I wasn't able to make it this year.
Yeah.
It is one of